Hi, it's Nicole, and today I'll be talking about the Moroccan books that I read in January for Invisible Cities. All of the books that I read from Morocco, I read in French because one of my bigger goals for the year is to read at least 5 books in French. Hopefully I can get a little bit past that, but this project in general and this month in particular was really good for that because there are a lot of Moroccan authors that write in French. This whole video will probably be not super well planned, so I'm very likely to be a little bit scatterbrained in talking about all this stuff, just so you know. So the first book that I read from Morocco for Invisible Cities, though technically not in January, was Le racisme expliqué à ma fille, or Racism Explained to My Daughter, by Tahar Ben Jelloun. I did a full review on this book, so I won't be talking about it too much here, but I did want to add to that it's not that I had a problem with him talking about religion as well, it's just that it felt like the book was a lot more about religion than about racism. And although there are definitely intersections there, I thought it would have been more valuable to talk about them in isolation and then intersectionally. And I think that would have been a lot more of a nuanced view on things. And I also felt like he was talking about racism mixed with religion within a specific context, but the book itself felt like it was pitching itself more generally, I suppose. And while I don't begrudge him too much for conflating religious hatreds with racial hatreds, I do think there is a difference between racism and, say, something like homophobia, which he also calls racism. So, you know, there were things like that I felt were really unnuanced about the book. But we also have to bear in mind that this book was a letter directed to a 10-year-old, so there's going to be a level of nuance that's just going to be missing there. And that was fine. It's just one of the things that I felt when reading the book. I would have appreciated a little bit more nuance on that front, because I'm not super convinced by calling all possible hatreds racism. I feel like we miss a lot of nuance in conflating everything together that way, and we miss a lot of context that way. The next Moroccan book that I read was Hshouma, Corps et Sexualité au Maroc by Zainab Fasiki. This one was, again, I read this in French, and now that I'm looking back on it, I don't think that this is actually available in English yet. I'm hoping that it does come out in English as well. I don't know if it will. So I don't know, that sucks for anybody who doesn't read French, I guess, but I wanted to talk about it anyway. One of the reasons that I picked this up is that I want to kind of, a low-key goal that I didn't really mention before, is that I would like to look for graphic novels from these different countries that we're looking at for Invisible Cities. I'm interested in being introduced to more comic artists and illustrators from around the world, and this is just the perfect way to kind of encourage myself to, you know, look for these people more often. And while this book is billed as a graphic novel, I think it's more of an illustrated essay. A more classic graphic novel from Morocco would have been Leila Slimani's Paroles, which was also on my list of books that I wanted to get around to, but I just didn't get around to this one in time. Back to Hshouma, which I think I'm probably pronouncing incorrectly, but hey, I don't know all the languages of the world, you know, just correct me, that's fine. This one I felt was overall a little bit simplistic if you are used to reading books about feminism and women's rights and gay rights and all of those kinds of things. This will feel a little bit simplistic. I think, though, it is aimed at a community, at a culture, at Moroccan culture, which isn't really well versed in those kinds of topics, generally speaking. That's what I gather from what Fasiki is saying in the book. And she talks about how in the Moroccan dialect there isn't even any word for certain parts of the body that are not just insults. So it's impossible to talk about certain things without it being a really vulgar conversation and not at all an academic one, or one that is to be had within polite society. The book actually is hard for me to exactly say who it's aimed at, because there are certain times when it feels like it's directed at fellow Moroccans, and then there are other times when it feels like she's explaining Moroccan culture to people who are not familiar with that culture. So it's like kind of seesawing between these two audiences that it envisions reading the book. And I feel like that makes it just a little bit undirected in its focus, but overall I thought it was fine. Even though the art style isn't exactly my kind of thing, I thought it was still quite striking, especially since it feels very bold and in your face with really solid heavy line work and solid black, white and red. It feels like it is reflecting the boldness of the content, and I quite like that kind of interplay between the visual and the content. Again, for me, I found this difficult to exactly come down on what I thought about it ultimately. I think it was fine as far as the content went and everything else, but I also feel like it's one of those things that's probably important for certain audiences. So then it was like, well, I don't know. I just feel kind of like I'm glad it exists. The next Moroccan book that I read in January was Affaire du pantalon de Dassoukine by Fouad Laroui. This has actually been translated into English beautifully by Emma Ramadan, and I read this as a buddy read in the Discord group with Georgiana, and that was such a fun experience. The book is a collection of short stories commenting on, criticizing, pointing at certain aspects of society. I would say more generally it looks at I guess critiquing convention and conventional thinking. The wry humor is just it really works for me so well, and I felt like each story in the collection for me was really strong. There was one that was less strong for me, but I think that's also partly because reading it in French, it was the most difficult one for me to read. And to comment just a little bit on the writing, I really loved the writing. This reading experience reminded me a little bit of when I read Amélie Nothomb, and I really loved that reading experience as well, and I read all of her books in French as well, and just the use of really rich language and rich vocabulary and funny turns of phrase, that kind of thing, I really appreciated a lot in this book. This is definitely an author I will be returning to probably quite a lot in future, because I just really got on with his writing style, as well as what he chose to write about and the way that he sort of highlights different things in funny situations and stuff like that. Another thing that I really appreciated when reading this was the tension that he builds within all of the stories. Sometimes it's an antagonistic tension, sometimes it's more of a playful tension between like a storyteller and someone who keeps interrupting them, but it doesn't quite get to the point where either person is like enraged or anything like that, but there's a bit of tension there anyway, and I just love that interplay with his characters, and overall it felt like I was getting a really authentic view of Morocco and Moroccan attitudes and humor and stuff. Obviously this is just one person, I can't base my entire understanding of a country or culture or anything on one person's take on things, but this felt like a really fun, authentic experience for me, and I'm definitely going to be returning to this author more in future. So I would say this was a very successful little venture for me. Morocco was the country that I was focusing the most on, and I'm really pleased that I got 3 books read and they were all in French, even though it does bear mentioning that one of those books I read in December, but whatever. So I ended up kind of looking at race and religious attitudes, women and LGBTQ plus communities in relation to Moroccan culture, as well as just the culture more generally, and humor and things that weren't directly explaining Morocco in that kind of non-fiction way. So I did some non-fiction, did some fiction. I really loved this approach, and I'd like to do that more generally with future months, future countries that we'll be exploring and stuff. Again, every month I will definitely be focusing more heavily on one of the countries and then try my best to maybe get some of the others in as well. But That's my approach. So yeah, that was really great. If you have any thoughts on any of the books that I've read, or if you would like to pick any of them up or have any questions about them or anything, just leave that in the comments below, because it's always really fun getting that dialogue going about all these different books and stuff. If you read anything else from Morocco that you think I would like, please do recommend away, like all of the recommendations below. I would love to get that. I already have a list of loads of books that I just really wanted to get to but just did not get the chance to, so those will be visited sometime in future, hopefully sooner rather than later, but who can tell. That's all I have to say for now, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.